The Titans before the Olympians bore. They were mighty temples, before marble columns rose under the burning Mediterranean sun, before the names Zeus, Hera, or Poseidon ever echoed through mountain valleys. There was only chaos, a word you might know as disorder, emptiness, a void. But for the ancient Greeks, chaos was the yawning nothingness that predated all things, an empty stretch so vast and so featureless that even time itself had nowhere to begin. You can almost imagine it, a dark canvas without color, shape, or sound. In this boundless space, according to the oldest myths whispered in archaic Greek dialects, something stirred. Not a person, or an animal, or even a thought, but a possibility. Out of chaos came Gaia, the earth, firm, rooted, unmoving. Gaia was not born in the way you and I understand birth. She simply was dot in a world starved of color. Gaia gave existence its first boundaries. She stretched wide and deep, bearing mountains, valleys, and the beginnings of seas. Without Gaia, the other gods would have had nowhere to stand. There was no Olympus yet, no throne for Zeus or crown for Hera, just Gaia's patient body, waiting. But Gaia alone was not enough. From chaos came Eros, a force not of romance in the way you might picture candlelit dinners and sweet whispers, but of attraction, of binding, of bringing things together so that they might multiply. Eros was the glue that made matter gather into shapes and creatures cling to life. Alongside Eros came Tartarus, a deep, shadowy pit beneath Gaia, darker and more terrible than anything we might compare to hell today. Tartarus would become the prison for unruly gods, but in these early stories, it was simply the underbelly of existence, the opposite of the fertile earth above. Gaia, alone but not idle, birthed Uranus of the sky. Picture it, the first horizon, the first dome of stars. Uranus stretched above Gaia, so close they touched endlessly. Some old poets imagined Uranus pressing down upon Gaia with such force that she could not move or breathe freely. In their tight embrace lay the seeds of a drama that would echo 4 generations of gods. From their union sprang the Titans, 12 colossal beings, older and stranger than the Olympians you likely know. They were not all thunder and lightning and dramatic metamorphoses. They were, in a way, archetypes of the world itself, slow, stubborn, immovable forces of nature. Their names still linger like ghosts. Oceanus, the river that encircled the world. Cous, the inquisitive mind. Crius, the measure of time. Hyperion, the light from above. Iapetus, the piercer. There, the sight. Rhea, the flow. Themis, order. Mnemosyne, memory. Phoebe, the shining one. Tethys, the nurturer. And Cronus, the youngest and, in time, the most dangerous. But Gaia and Uranus did not stop with the Titans. There were others, strange and monstrous. The Hecatonchires, 3 brothers each with 50 heads and 100 arms. Their names, Briareus, Cottus, and Gyges, rarely appear on the pages of modern school books, but in these myths, they were mighty, chaotic, unstoppable. Uranus, terrified by their raw power and grotesque forms, hid them deep inside Gaia's own body, returning them to the darkness beneath the earth. So Gaia, who had given life, now bore the pain of imprisonment. Within her, the weight of her monstrous children pressed down on her inner soil at roots that refused to bloom. For Gaia, a goddess who was the earth itself, there was no difference between womb and prison. The children she birthed were both her pride and her burden. As centuries passed, if you can call time centuries, when there is no sun to mark days, Uranus grew crueler. Every child Gaia bore that displeased him was buried back inside her. Some old poets say Uranus feared being overthrown by his own children. The same dread would haunt the gods that followed him. For what is a king if not a child who someday must fear his own children? It was under this heavy sky that the Titans lived. They watched their siblings buried alive within the earth. They watched their mother strain in silent pain. And they did nothing, or perhaps they could do nothing. Titans were mighty, but they were not yet cunning. They did not yet know rebellion, or strategy, or the poison, that is resentment, except for Cronus. Cronus, the youngest Titan, was not the strongest, but he was the most ambitious. He felt Gaia's pain as his own. In some versions, Gaia came to him in whispers, her voice the rumble of shifting mountains, and the sigh of wind through leaves. She asked him, would he dare raise a hand against his father, Uranus? Would he dare free the hidden children and allow Gaia to breathe once more? And so the seed of rebellion was planted, not in an Olympian temple, but deep within the hidden thoughts of a Titan crouched under a sky that pressed down to hard. Cronus did not act alone at first. Gaia, patient and enduring, forged a weapon, a sickle made of unbreakable flint. It would be used not for farming, but for the harvesting of power. She handed it to her youngest son and asked him to do the unthinkable, sever the sky from the earth. Imagine that for a moment. A world where the sky and the earth are not separate, but locked in an eternal embrace, and one child stands ready to cut them apart, forever changing the face of existence. In the hush before the strike, you might wonder, did Cronus feel fear? Did he feel loyalty to the father who had given him nothing but weight and darkness? Or did he feel something new, the taste of power, bitter and sweet, blooming at the back of his throat? As night fell over this ageless world, if we can call it night without a sun, Cronus gathered his brothers. Some say only 4 joined him, Cous, Crius, Hyperion, and Iapetus. They lay in wait while Uranus descended to lie with Gaia once more, and when he did, Cronus struck. He swung the flint sickle with all the cold resolve of a son who has waited too long. He cut deep, severing Uranus from Gaia, sky from earth, father from child. Uranus's blood rained down upon the soil, and from that blood new beings would spring, the Furies, spirits of vengeance, the giants who would rise in later wars, and Aphrodite, who would someday tame hearts with softer powers. But that part of the story waits for another section. For now, Uranus's scream echoes through the darkness. Cronus stands victorious, sickle dripping, ice fixed on the horizon he has just created. The Titans are free, the monsters released, Gaia breathes again, yet Cronus does not yet know that what he did to his father will echo back to him in due time. If a son can strike down a father, what stops another son from striking him down in turn? And so, with the sky split from the earth, and the first rebellion won, the seed of betrayal was planted in the divine soil of myth. But one question lingers as you drift into this ancient hush. What did Cronus see when he looked into the blooded sky? And did he fear the shadow of his own children yet unborn? After Uranus fell, the world did not suddenly erupt into harmony or balance. There was no triumphal parade, no chorus of praises for Cronus. Instead, the sky hung quiet and wounded above the earth, drifting just beyond Gaia's reach. The Titans, newly freed, stepped out into a realm they barely understood, a world not yet lit by sun or arranged by seasons, but brimming with possibilities and dangers. Cronus now held the sickle, a simple tool turned symbol of power. Its cold edge was a reminder that even the divine could bleed. He had proved himself capable of reshaping existence, but now he faced a subtler challenge. Ruling over it, he crowned himself king of the Titans. There was no golden diadem or marble throne. Cronus's power lay in his control over the heavens and earth. His siblings accepted his reign, partly because he had freed them, partly because they, like him, feared a return of Uranus's oppressive rule. But in the hush of their new freedom, the Titans carried a seed of unease. They had seen what Cronus was willing to do to his father. So what might he do to them if they opposed him? Cronus chose a consort, his sister Rhea, the flowing one. In old hymns and cracked pottery fragments, Rhea appears as both queen and mother, her presence like a river running steady beneath the stones. She was no passive figure, though later myths would often reduce her to one. She was patience and Survival given form, the quiet strength behind the coming storm. Together, Cronus and Rhea brought forth the next generation of divine beings. Their children were not titans. They were something new, smaller in stature perhaps, but quicker, keener, more cunning. Among them were Hestia, goddess of the hearth; Demeter, goddess of grain and growth; Hera, future queen of Olympus; Hades, lord of the underworld; Poseidon, master of the seas; and Zeus, the storm-bearer yet to come. But before these children could shape the world, they were swallowed whole. For Cronus, like Uranus before him, was haunted by prophecy. Gaia and Uranus, wounded but not silent, whispered to him a grim prediction. One of your own children will overthrow you, just as you overthrew your father. It is here that myth reveals its cold cycle, the endless pattern of fathers fearing sons, of rulers trying to clutch eternity in their fists. Cronus, terrified by shadows yet unborn, decided that the safest place for his children was inside himself, where they could not rise against him. And so, when each child was born, Rhea wept as she handed the infant over. Cronus opened his mouth, not a father's smile, but a cavernous maw, and swallowed each child whole inside him. They did not die. They lingered, cramped and silent, tiny gods locked in a living prison of flesh and fear. Imagine Rhea's sorrow. The earth itself could feel her grief. She turned to Gaia, her mother, for counsel. Gaia, the eternal mother, whispered of a plan. The next time Rhea birthed a child, she would not hand it over. She would hide it, just as Gaia once hid Cronus's monstrous brothers within her. When the time came, Rhea gave birth not in the open halls of the Titans, but in secret, deep in a cave on the island of Crete. There she bore Zeus, her youngest son. To deceive Cronus, she wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and offered it as if it were her newborn child. Cronus, driven by fear more than reason, swallowed the stone without question. In doing so, he sealed his doom. While Cronus ruled, the world drifted in an easy quiet. He held the sky firmly apart from the earth, his power absolute yet brittle. The Titans under his rule did not rebel. Most accepted their roles, content to embody the primal forces they represented. Oceanus encircled the world's edge, the rivers and seas pouring from him in endless flow. Hyperion, the Titan of light, fathered Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn. Time ticked forward, not yet measured by human calendars, but by the steady rhythms of nature. Yet beneath this apparent order, discontent grew. The monsters Uranus had buried, the Hecatonchires, the Cyclopes, still languished in the shadows of Tartarus, locked away by Cronus, who feared their power as much as his father had. Gaia, ever the quiet architect of rebellion, had not forgotten her pain. She whispered to Zeus, hidden in his Cretan cave, feeding him tales of injustice and urging him to grow strong enough to break the cycle of fathers devouring sons. The old poems say Zeus was raised by nymphs in secret, nourished on the milk of Amalthea, a divine goat whose horn would later become the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, to drown out the infant's cries. The Caretes, young warriors or spirits of Crete, clashed their bronze shields and spears in ritual dance, masking the noise so Cronus would not hear the child's wails. While Zeus grew in secret, Cronus's rule grew more fragile. The Titans, though loyal, sensed the crack in his armor. Rhea, once the dutiful queen, carried the knowledge of the stone hidden in her heart. Even the earth itself seemed to wait, patient and coiled like a snake ready to shed its skin. When Zeus reached maturity, whether by divine speed or by years measured in human ways, no one can truly say. He left the cave that had been his cradle and prison. He sought allies first among his buried uncles, the Hecatonchires and Cyclopes. With Gaia's guidance, Zeus freed them from Tartarus. In gratitude, they forged gifts for him, thunder and lightning, weapons no Titan could wield. Armed now, not just with prophecy, but with power, Zeus returned to face his father. Yet even the storm-bearer could not face Cronus alone. He needed cunning, and for that, he turned to Metis, goddess of wisdom. Together they devised a way to make Cronus disgorge what he had stolen. Metis brewed a potion so potent that when Cronus drank it, he could not keep his stolen children within him. One by one, the swallowed gods emerged: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Reborn into the world, they were meant to rule. The children, now grown, did not crawl from Cronus's belly as babes, but as deities in full power. Shaped by years in darkness, they joined Zeus, their youngest brother, in open revolt. The old cycle had begun again, a son against his father, but now with an army at his side. Cronus, so careful and so ruthless, found himself cornered by the very fear that had driven him. He had swallowed the future, but could not digest it. The Titans rallied behind him, while Zeus gathered his siblings, the freed monsters, and any ally willing to bet on the young storm god's rising thunder. The sky that Uranus once pressed upon, Gaia now thundered with the approach of war. The Titans stood tall, ancient and massive, forces of stone and time and ocean. Against them rose the younger gods, quicker, more cunning, bearing weapons of light and storm. And so the stage was set for the Titanomachi, the 10-year war that would split the heavens and the earth once again. The Titans would stand upon Mount Arthries, Zeus and his siblings upon Mount Olympus, two peaks facing each other across a valley where lightning would crash and mountains would crumble. But that clash is not for this section. For now, imagine Cronus alone in the hush before battle, a god who devoured his children only to see them rise stronger than before. Did he regret the sickle he once wielded? Did he think of Uranus's scream as he felt the storm gathering? Above him, the cycle of fathers and sons, of power won and lost, had begun anew, yet somewhere in the rustle of Gaia's soil and the sigh of the wind, one might wonder, can any ruler truly break free of the shadow cast by the past, or are they doomed to repeat it in new forms, over and over again? The storm did not come all at once. Like all things in the old world, it began slowly, gathering in whispers across the crags of Mount Olympus and the rugged slopes of Mount Arthries. For 10 long years, the sky split and closed, rumbling with thunder that was more than weather. It was prophecy, rebellion, and the crackling pulse of a world about to change forever. This was the Titanomachi, a word that means simply war of the Titans, but beneath its plain surface lies an upheaval that would carve a permanent divide between the old gods and the new. On one side, Cronus stood at the center of his Titan kin, the ancient siblings who had helped him rise against Uranus, but now braced themselves against the new winds of change. Hyperion, the Titan of heavenly light, towered beside him. Cus, the Inquisitor, sharp-eyed and wary. Iapetus, who pierced the world's secrets. Oceanus, the endless river, stayed aloof, neither for nor against. Even the mighty Atlas joined Cronus's ranks, his shoulders already familiar with burdens yet to come. Opposing them, Zeus gathered his siblings, Hestia's quiet warmth, Demeter's fertile promise, Hera's regal resolve, Poseidon's seething depths, and Hades's chill of finality. Beside them stood the freed Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, the 100-handed giants who, for the first time in ages, saw the sky without prison bars. Imagine, for a moment, these battles not as clashing spears and bronze shields, but as elemental forces colliding. The Cyclopes hurled boulders the size of mountains. The Hecatonchires rained stones and trees like hail from a thundercloud. Zeus's thunderbolts split the air with cracks that left new rivers in their wake. Poseidon's trident churned the seas, sending waves to batter the Titans' strongholds. Hades wielded the mist and gloom of what would become his underworld, sowing confusion among Cronus's ranks. The battle stretched across valleys and peaks, over forests and coasts. Where the Titans stood, the earth trembled and broke. Where the Olympians struck, the sky flared with blinding fire. The humans who would later worship these gods were not yet here to watch. Only Gaia bore witness, her soul torn open again and again, her mountains shattered and remade. Some titans fell quickly. Creos and Kus, fierce yet rigid, could not match the cunning tactics of Zeus and Metis. Hyperion's light dimmed under the storms Zeus hurled at him. Only Atlas stood unyielding, a pillar of Titan resolve, who seemed to embody the very mountains he fought upon. But Cronus did not yield. He wielded his sickle still, its flint edge gleaming even as thunderbolts slammed into his armor of stone and time. He had swallowed eternity once. Now he spat defiance into the lightning. Again and again he rallied his siblings, calling them to hold the line against sons and daughters who seemed to grow stronger with every strike. Yet the war was more than brute force. It was a contest of patience, too. Zeus learned what Cronus had once understood. Power did not lie only in strength, but in strategy, alliances, and timing. With Metis whispering counsel, Zeus struck where Cronus was weakest, the edges of his unity. One by one, lesser titans broke away or fell silent, sensing the wind had shifted. Even Oceanus, the endless river, withdrew from the fight altogether, choosing the flow of time over futile resistance. In the final clash, deep within the shadowed caves of Thessaly or the jagged heights of Arthries, the stories disagree. Cronus faced Zeus not as father to son, but as two kings who understood too well the price of thrones. Sparks of thunder crashed against the flint blade, the air boiled with rain and fire. Cronus's roars mingled with Zeus's defiant cries until sky and earth seemed ready to tear apart for good. When Cronus fell, for fall he did, the world did not cheer. No temple bells rang out, no trumpets sounded, the earth simply sighed. Gaia felt the weight lift from her stone ribs and braced herself for the rule of yet another sun. The Titans did not all perish. That was not Zeus's way, nor would it have pleased Gaia to see her first children destroyed utterly. Instead, the Olympians, with their newfound dominion, cast the defeated Titans into Tartarus, that deep pit beneath the earth, the same shadowy prison that had once held the monstrous Hecatonchias and Cyclopes. Now the jailers became the jailed. To guard them, Zeus set the Hecatonchias at the gates, ensuring the Titans' strength would never rise unchecked again. Only a few were spared: Oceanus, who remained in his river's flow, and Prometheus, and Epimetheus, who had sided with Zeus when they saw which way the winds of fate blew. These last Titans would have parts to play in later tales. Prometheus would bring fire to humankind and suffer for it. Epimetheus would open a box better left closed. And Cronus, some old stories say, he was imprisoned alongside his siblings, raging in Tartarus, where the darkness swallowed even his regrets. Others whisper he was exiled to the edges of the world, adrift in the dreamlike isles of the blessed, where old gods sleep in an easy peace. In time, Romans would imagine him as Saturn, a gentler harvest god, a mellow echo of his sharper Greek myth. With the Titans fallen, the Olympians rose. Zeus divided the realms with his brothers, sky for himself, sea for Poseidon, underworld for Hades. The earth, Gaia's body, was left to all and none, free and yet endlessly claimed by gods and mortals alike. Rhea, who had suffered so long, was honored as the mother of gods, her quiet rebellion remembered in the mountain shrines of Crete. The stone Cronus had swallowed was set at Delphi as an Omphalos, the navel of the world, a reminder of a lie that had toppled a king. And so the old cycle ended, or so the myths claim. Yet if you listen closely to the tales, you hear the hum of a question that never quite dies. When a ruler seizes power by rebellion, does he not invite the same fate in turn? Zeus, crowned with thunder, would one day hear prophecies of his own downfall. Gods and kings, it seems, live forever in the long shadow cast by their fathers. But for now, the sky and earth lay separate and free. The storms calmed, the mountains healed their wounds, rivers returned to their beds. Somewhere on a rocky peak, Zeus sat with his siblings, the new rulers of a world not yet finished. They looked down at valleys waiting for human voices, forests waiting for myths to root among their trunks, seas waiting for ships and storms and prayers. It is here that we leave the titans, colossal forces that shaped the first chapters of Greek myth, now silent beneath the earth's crust, their stories echoing in distant thunder and shifting stone. And if tonight you hear the wind sigh through the trees or feel the tremor of a distant quake, you might wonder, are the titans still there, dreaming in Tartarus, waiting for some shift in the world to loosen their chains? Perhaps the earth remembers, perhaps, in its deepest roots and darkest caves, the old gods murmur that nothing, not even eternity, stays buried forever. Cronus and the silent rebellion. Cronus became a king before his name was whispered in dread by the titans, and the sky itself trembled at the sweep of his sickle. He was simply the youngest son, the last born of Gaia and Uranus, hidden behind his elder brother's immense shadows. In the hush of the first world, the titans had no temples, no priests, no offerings. They were not gods in the way you and I might picture them, not yet. They were more like elements given shape, the ocean's endless rush, the weight of mountains, the hush of memory, the pulse of time itself. Among these primeval forces, Cronus was an odd thing, restless, silent, watchful. He was not the strongest, not the brightest, but he saw the cracks no one else dared see. His older brothers, Oceanus, Hyperion, Cous, Crius, Iapetus, were vast and self-assured, their dominions clear, river, light, intellect, measure, the piercing of secrets. But what was Cronus's realm? He was the harvest of time, the cycle of sowing and reaping, the blade that cuts the stalk when the crop is ripe. It was a strange domain for a son born into a family where time was endless and harvest meaningless. Yet the world was changing, even if the titans did not yet know it. Cronus spent his youth in the long shadows cast by Uranus. He saw his father descend each night to cover Gaia, pressing the earth tight beneath an unyielding sky. He saw his mother, the earth herself, groan under the weight of suns and monsters forced back inside her. He felt it, too, the press of inevitability, the suffocation of potential buried alive. Cronus listened when his siblings dared to speak in hushed tones. He listened as Cous muttered about Uranus's cruelty, but did nothing. He watched Hyperion's light flicker with rage, but remained trapped under that unbroken sky. The titans were mighty. They could uproot mountains, pour rivers from their palms, but not one of them would dare strike their father. So Cronus learned in silence. He learned that power could be patient, that sometimes the blade must wait for the right season to cut. And he learned from Gaia's sighs how a mother's suffering can become sharper than any flint sickle. In the dark, when the titans slept under Uranus's suffocating dome, Gaia spoke to Cronus, not in words, but in tremors and rustlings, the whisper of roots beneath his feet, the quiet shift of stone beneath his resting head. She reminded him, "I bore you not to be buried, but to bear the weight of change." She spoke of a world where sky and earth could breathe apart, where seeds could sprout toward sunlight unblocked by oppressive vaults of starless heaven. Cronus did not leap to rebellion. He watched, he waited, he studied his father, how Uranus moved when he descended, how he kept his monstrous children hidden within Gaia's depths. He watched his siblings, Rhea's patient strength, Oceanus's endless flow, Cus's restless eyes. They were all pieces of a puzzle he alone seemed willing to complete. It was Rhea who first dared to speak to him of the impossible. Beneath the boughs of the first forests that existed not as we know them now, but as primeval groves of living thought and spirit, she met him in secret. There were no birds yet to bear tales, no mortal ears to overhear, just the two of them, brother and sister, conspirators before they were consorts. She asked him, what if Uranus could be moved? And Cronus, quiet as ever, answered with a question of his own. What if he could be cut away? In the hush of that forest, the first rebellion was born, not in thunder or clash, but in a whisper passed between siblings, It was not strength that would fell Uranus, but resolve, and the flint sickle Gaia would give them, a shard of earth sharp enough to wound the sky. Gaia, for her part, did not rage like Zeus would later rage. She did not storm or thunder, she simply endured, and that endurance forged the blade from her deepest stones, older than any mountain range you could name today. She shaped the sickle and gave it to Cronus. When Cronus took that sickle in his hands, he did not yet feel like a king. He felt like a son burdened by a mother's faith and a father's tyranny. He gathered his brothers, one by one. Some he convinced through quiet logic. Do you want to spend eternity buried alive in your mother's ribs? Some he swayed with fear. Do you think Uranus will spare you forever? And some he simply needed to remind of pain. Listen, can you not hear Gaia groaning beneath us? Cous, Crius, Hyperion, Olympus, they agreed, reluctantly, but agreed nonetheless. Oceanus alone stayed away, flowing ever outward, unwilling to stand directly against father or son. He would be a river forever, surrounding the world's edge, but never dipping into its storms. Together, the conspirators waited. Cronus learned how to listen to the rhythm of Uranus's visits, how to sense the shift in Gaia's crust when the sky lowered to embrace the earth. He learned to measure the silence before action, to still his siblings' trembling hands. And he learned that rebellion is lonelier than tyranny, for no matter how many stand beside you, the blade is yours, to wield alone. When the night of reckoning came, Cronus lay hidden among the roots and rocks, his brothers poised at the edges to hold Uranus fast. There are no hymns that sing of their terror, no temples that recall their doubt, but if you close your eyes and listen to the hush between your heartbeats, you might hear it, the silence of children waiting to strike their father. As Uranus descended, the sky pressing close to the earth, as he always did, the trap closed. Cous and Crius seized Uranus's arms, Hyperion pinned him with his blinding light, Olympus held him fast, and Cronus stepped from the shadows, the sickle cold and heavy in his grasp. There was no roar, no battle cry, just a single, clean motion. The harvest of rebellion, the sickle flashed in the darkness, a line drawn between sky and earth that would never be closed again. Uranus's scream tore through Gaia's roots, shaking mountains not yet formed, rattling seeds not yet sown. As the sky recoiled, severed from the soil, Cronus stood over his father's ruin. The sickle dripped with the first divine blood, soaking into Gaia's waiting earth. From that blood, new beings would emerge, the Furies who would haunt the guilty, the giants who would someday challenge the Olympians, and Aphrodite, the impossible beauty born from foam. Yet in that moment, Cronus did not see beauty or vengeance. He saw only what he had done. He had severed heaven from earth, silenced a tyrant, freed his mother, and in that silence, he realized something Gaia had not told him. Once you take the throne by force, you are forever bound to defend it by force. Uranus fell silent, the sky recoiling to its distant perch, and Gaia breathed for the first time. In an age, Cronus looked at his brothers, shaken, awed, afraid. He looked at Rhea, strong, steady, silent as ever. And he looked at the sickle, the blade that had given him power, and would someday return to haunt him. In that hush, new question drifted through the cool night air. Could Cronus rule without becoming the very thing he had destroyed? When Uranus fell, the world did not immediately settle into the peaceful, open realm Gaia had dreamed of during her long suffering. Instead, the earth shifted beneath Cronus's new throne, an invisible seat built not of marble or gold, but of fear, memory, and the echoes of a father's last scream. Cronus, newly crowned, stood not only as the Titan king, but also as a symbol, proof that even the sky could bleed if pressed hard enough. His brothers hailed him as their liberator, but behind their gratitude flickered the question none dared ask aloud. If Cronus could topple Uranus, who would topple Cronus? For a time, though, rebellion gave way to order. Cronus claimed Rhea as his queen, not through force but through understanding. She had stood beside him when the sickle first struck, her resolve matching his, her silence more binding than any spoken vow. In her, Cronus found not just a partner, but a mirror. She, too, carried the weight of Gaia's dreams and the fear of what new power might bring. Under their rule, the world settled into its first semblance of pattern. Gaia, freed from Uranus's oppressive embrace, stretched and shifted. Mountains rose higher, rivers cut deeper into the earth, forests spread green canopies beneath an ever-distant sky. Some ancient poets claimed that under Cronus, a brief golden age dawned, an age when gods did not yet toy with mortals, when hunger was unknown, when the world gave freely of its fruits, and the seasons knew no frost. Cronus, it is said, embodied this bounty. He became a god of harvests, a force of cycles, planting, ripening, reaping. His sickle, once stained with Uranus's blood, was repurposed in myths as the tool that cut wheat from fields, ensuring no grain was wasted, no stalk left standing past its time. He ruled with measured calm, the calm of a farmer watching the skies, hoping the storms would wait until the crops were safe in the granaries. Yet even in this harmony, shadows lengthened. Gaia, who had whispered rebellion into her youngest son's heart, began to see the same iron bands forming around her once more. Cronus, who had struck down a tyrant father to free the earth, began to sense what Uranus had once felt, the slow creep of fear that power, once seized, can just as easily be stolen. It began with a whisper, the same way it always does. Some say Gaia herself, perhaps testing her son, gave voice to the prophecy. A child of Cronus shall rise against him, as he rose against Uranus. Others insist it was Uranus's last words, carried on winds and stars, that haunted Cronus's dreams. As you have done to me, so shall it be done to you. Cronus tried to shrug off these warnings at first. He was king, the harvest king, the ruler who had freed earth and sky. He had Rhea at his side, the steady stream of time and seasons flowing with him. He believed, as all kings do, that he would be different, wiser than Uranus, more loved by his siblings, more trusted by the earth that bore him. Yet time, ironically, was Cronus's enemy, for time gives birth to change, and change is the soil where rebellion sprouts. Rhea bore him children, bright and promising, each a new shoot of potential power. Hestia came first, a quiet flame of the hearth. Demeter next, rich with the promise of fields and harvests. Then Hera, regal and watchful even as a child. Then Hades, shadowed and solemn, with eyes that saw things Cronus would have preferred hidden. Poseidon followed, restless, deep, impossible to contain. With each birth, Cronus felt the old tremor, the memory of standing over Uranus with the sickle poised, the knowledge that the same blade might one day swing his way. He looked at his newborns and saw not blessings but threats. And so, slowly, the harvest king who had once freed the earth became its jailer once again. When Hestia was born, Cronus hesitated. He held her close, cradled her soft warmth. But the whispers coiled tighter around his mind. She will grow, she will turn. So he opened his mouth and swallowed her whole. No one spoke of it, not at first. The Titans turned away, pretending not to see the king devour his child. Rhea wept alone, her tears watering the roots of the oldest oaks. Yet, when Demeter was born, the same horror repeated. Another infant swallowed whole, buried not in the earth, but in the living prison of Cronus's gut. By the time Hera, Hades, and Poseidon arrived, the cycle was habit. Cronus did not even hold them to his chest. He simply took them from Rhea's trembling arms and gulped them down, each act a grim echo of the rebellion he had once led in Gaia's name. Rhea, once the silent partner, found her voice in grief. She pleaded with Cronus, "Do not fear your own flesh and blood. They are your heirs, your future." But Cronus had tasted the iron tang of power, and the sharp fear that nothing lasts forever. He tightened his grip instead. He sharpened his sickle, kept it close at hand, a reminder to all that the blade which reaps can always strike again. The other titans watched with uneasy hearts. They had once followed Cronus out of fear of Uranus's cruelty. Now they watched their king become a father and a devourer. The very horror they thought they'd buried with the sky. But none rose to stop him. Oceanus stayed at the world's edge. Hyperion shone, but did not burn. Cous and Crius held their tongues. Only Gaia, patient Gaia, wounded yet enduring, began to stir once more. In the deepest caves of Crete, far from Cronus's cold halls, Gaia whispered to Rhea, "Do not break, do not bury your sorrow where it cannot grow. The harvest king must be reaped in turn." Rhea listened. She knew Cronus's routine, how he watched her during births, how he demanded the newborn before she could wrap it tight. She knew the press of his shadow in the birthing chambers, the chill of his hand as he took their children to his mouth. She knew he trusted her silence, and that silence would be his undoing. So when the time came to bear her youngest, she fled the familiar chambers of the Titans and sought refuge in the wild caves of Mount Ida on Crete. There, hidden among goat herds and wild fig trees, she gave birth to Zeus, the child who would bear the storm in his veins. In that dark cave, Rhea looked at her son's tiny face and saw not just rebellion, but hope, a cycle ready to break, or at least to turn. Once more, she wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth, a crude deception, but enough for a king blinded by dread. She returned to Cronus's halls with her fake child, her heart thunderous with fear and resolve. Cronus took the stone without question. He opened his jaw and swallowed it whole, never sensing that the thing he feared most was now hidden far from his grasp, growing stronger in the secret heart of Crete. And so, in the hush between seasons, the harvest king sowed the seeds of his own downfall, not with sickles or storms, but with the silence of a mother's grief turned cunning. Yet, for now, Cronus sat upon his unseen throne, surrounded by a world he believed firmly in his grasp. He ruled the Titans, he ruled the seasons, he ruled the silence of the sky and earth. But deep beneath the roots of the wild fig trees, a child suckled goat's milk and listened to Gaia's lullabies, waiting for the day when storms would break the calm. And if Cronus dreamed at night, if he felt the ache of betrayal yet to come, he told no one. He held his sickle close and told himself he had done what was needed, as all kings do when they fear the harvest they have sown. Years passed in the hush between seasons. The Titans ruled an earth that seemed timeless on its surface, mountains unchanged, rivers flowing as they always had, the sky distant and silent. Yet beneath this stillness, something small and persistent stirred, a heartbeat in a hidden cave. The breath of storms gathering behind a calm horizon. Far from Cronus's cold halls, Zeus grew among shadows and whispers. Crete cradled him like a secret. Nymphs and spirits of the wild nursed him with honey and goat's milk. Amalthea, the divine goat, fed him when the nymphs could not, her curved horns brushing against the stone walls like a promise of plenty in the leanest moments. To drown out the baby's cries, so that Cronus would never hear. The Caretes, warrior spirits of the mountain, clashed their bronze swords on their shields in ritual dance. Night after night, the clang of metal rang through the caves like distant thunder, a lullaby of iron and resolve. Gaia, patient and vast, hummed beneath the stone, feeding Zeus her old secrets. The cycle must turn, the sickle must swing again. Meanwhile, Cronus ruled from his unseen throne, never sensing that the seed he feared had not only survived, but rooted itself in the world's hidden folds. The Titans around him carried on their ancient duties, Oceanus encircling the world's edge in endless flow, Hyperion shining his light across sky and sea, Cous and Crius, eyes sharp but lips sealed, unwilling or unable to say what they knew must come. Sometimes, at night, Rhea dreamed of her hidden son. She dreamed of thunderheads gathering above Crete, of a boy growing taller than the olive trees, his laughter mingling with the bleat of goats and the clash of the Caretes. Blades, She dreamed of Cronus's pale face when he would one day learn the truth, that all his swallowing, all his hoarding of power, could not change the harvest he had sown. Zeus did not grow like mortal children do, inch by inch, year by year. Time bent for him, as it does for gods in the dawn of the world. Each season he grew stronger, legs sure on rocky slopes, eyes bright with the promise of storms. He spoke first to Amalthea, his words mixing with the low murmur of the wind. He spoke next to the nymphs, who taught him the ways of mountains and streams, how to listen for Gaia's voice beneath the stones. When Zeus was grown, not yet a king, but no longer a hidden child, Gaia sent him a guide, Metis, the goddess of deep wisdom and cunning counsel. She came to him with thunderbolts, but with quiet strategies, the same quiet that had once armed Cronus with a sickle. She taught Zeus that storms do not simply rage. They gather, they test the air, they wait for the crack in the clouds. Metis showed him the path to his uncles, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, the monsters Cronus had feared so much that he'd buried them deep in Tartarus. The Cyclopes, one-eyed smiths of brute strength and cunning craft, remembered their old shackles well. The Hecatonchires, the hundred-handed giants, still dreamed of open skies and the weight of stone in their many palms. With Metis's whispers, Zeus descended to Tartarus's shadowy rim, a place deeper than the deepest cave, darker than the longest night. There, beneath the watchful gaze of Gaia, he unshackled his monstrous uncles. The Cyclopes, grateful for freedom, repaid him in fire and iron. They forged for him his greatest weapons, thunder, lightning, the crackling thunderbolt that would one day split mountains and scatter titans like leaves in the wind. The Hecatonchires took no gift but freedom. They stood beside Zeus, towering forces of chaos with 100 fists ready to fling boulders, tear stone from mountain flanks, and hurl them skyward. Armed with storm and stone, Zeus rose from Tartarus not as a hidden child, but as a young god, ready to reclaim what Cronus had swallowed, not only his siblings, but the very future Cronus thought he could digest. The final spark came from Metis's cunning. With her potion, Zeus tricked Cronus into vomiting up what he had buried alive. One by one, Zeus's siblings emerged, not as helpless babes, but as gods in their prime. Hestia's half-warmth, Demeter's fertile promise, Hera's regal force, Hades' cold dominion, Poseidon's restless depths. Together, they did not tremble before Cronus's sickle. They faced him not as frightened children, but as storms, seas, shadows, and flame. A new pantheon ready to tear the old world open. So began the Titanomachi, the war that echoed the first rebellion, but thundered even louder. Mount Arthris for the Titans, Mount Olympus for the young gods. The sky cracked with lightning not hurled by Uranus or Cronus, but by Zeus, the storm-bearer, who understood both the sickle and the harvest. The battles raged for 10 long years. Boulders hurled like pebbles, mountains torn and remade, seas boiled into mist. Each clash was an echo of Cronus's first betrayal, each thunderbolt a reminder that power seized by fear will always meet its reckoning in the end. In the final clash, Zeus faced Cronus in a storm so fierce that even Gaia trembled. Cronus, sickle in hand, swung as he once had against Uranus. But this time the blade met thunder, lightning, and the unstoppable force of all his swallowed fears returned in flesh and fury. No old hymn tells exactly how Cronus fell. Some say Zeus shattered the sickle first, breaking the cycle in a single stroke. Others whisper that Rhea herself stood behind Cronus, her silent grief made sharp enough to pierce the thickest armor of dread. In the end, Cronus did not die. Gods, after all, do not perish as mortals do. Instead, Zeus cast him and his Titan kin into Tartarus's pit, chaining them with the same chains Cronus once used on the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires. Atlas alone was given a crueler sentence, to hold the sky aloft forever, a living pillar between heaven and earth, a reminder that the sky, once severed, must always be upheld by the strength of those left behind. The world breathed easier, For a time, Zeus and his siblings carved realms for themselves, thunder and storm for Zeus, the sea's depths for Poseidon, the shadows of the dead for Hades. Rhea, the silent conspirator, became the revered mother of gods, her deception retold in cave shrines where figs still grow and goats still roam, and Cronus, the silent rebel turned devourer turned captive, lingered beneath the earth, buried not only in stone but in memory. Later ages softened him into Saturn, a mellow harvest god, golden scythed and crowned with wheat. Mortals, needing festivals to mark the turning of seasons, would remember him in Saturnalia, a time when roles reversed, when kings served slaves, when order bent backward to honor the chaos that first brought sky and earth apart. Even so, the sickle remains. It lies buried in every revolution, every quiet whisper that topples a throne. It reminds us that the harvest is not only the reaping of grain, but the cutting of kings who believe they stand above the cycles of time. So next time you hear the wind rustle dry stalks, or see the crescent of a sickle moon hanging above fields ready to harvest, think of Cronus. Think of the son who struck his father, the father who swallowed his children, the king who learned too late that time devours all, even the harvest king himself, and wonder if the cycle turned for Uranus and turned again for Cronus, how, long before the storm finds the next throne. The birth of Prometheus, the titan who stole fire in the age when titans ruled the land and the Olympians were yet to be named. There were few figures as curious and quietly dangerous as Prometheus. While Cronus sharpened his sickle and Zeus gathered storms, Prometheus did something both simpler and far more enduring. He thought, if you stood beside him then, in those earliest days when the world was still raw with volcanic heat and dripping forests, you would not see a towering figure casting bolts of lightning or raising mountains with a stump. You would see a titan who watched the flicker of embers in the darkness and wondered what warmth could do for fragile things that could barely crawl upright. Humankind. But before Prometheus could shape the destinies of mortals, he was simply a child of titans, the son of Iapetus, brother to Atlas, Epimetheus, and Menetius. Each brother carried a trait that would carve their paths into myth. Atlas with his unyielding endurance, Epimetheus with his clumsy hindsight, Menetius with his reckless pride, and Prometheus with his unsettling foresight. Promethea was his gift and his burden. He saw patterns where others saw only chaos, glimpses of what might be stitched into what was. This quiet skill set him apart even in a family of primeval forces. While Atlas shouldered mountains and Epimetheus admired the curve of the rivers, Prometheus asked why rivers curved at all, and what lay beyond them. In those early ages, humankind, if it can be called that yet, was little more than a hesitant experiment. Gaia's soil had coughed them up in fits and starts, fragile creatures with soft hands and weaker teeth, standing uncertainly on two legs beneath stars that neither warned nor pitied them. Some say the Olympians, newly victorious over Cronus, found these early humans amusing at best and disposable at worst, like brittle toys scattered across cold hills and forests. Yet, where the gods saw toys, Prometheus saw potential. He wandered among these early beings, moving unseen through their rough encampments, watching them huddle together for warmth they could never keep. He saw how they flinched at thunder, but lifted their heads at dawn. He saw how they stumbled on roots, but returned to the same paths until the forest bent to their passing feet. In these frail shapes, Prometheus glimpsed something that neither Titans nor Olympians possessed in full: an ability to grow, to adapt, to fail and try again. Titans were forces, vast, unchanging. Olympians were eternal, powerful but proud. Humans were neither vast nor eternal, yet they carried within them a restlessness that mirrored Prometheus's own. Some nights he would sit among them, silent and invisible. He watched them tear scraps of meat with stone teeth. He saw how their children died easily, how their old ones shivered into silence when the snows crept too close to the cave mouth. He watched lightning split an ancient oak, and wondered why fire should be the gods alone, when it could mean survival for those who needed it most. It was during these hidden vigils that Prometheus's mind turned fully from Titan to trickster. Though the word trick feels too small for what he would become, he was not mischievous for sport. He was dangerous because he asked why not in a world ruled by because it is so. When he returned to his Titan kin, they paid him little mind. Atlas prepared for his punishment, for already the seeds of rebellion had begun to coil in Zeus's mind, and Atlas would soon bear the sky as penance. Menecius roared at storms, daring Zeus to strike him down, and Epimetheus dreamed empty dreams, playing with twigs and stones, as if they were toys that could matter. Prometheus alone carried a secret fire in his thoughts. He watched Zeus and the new gods shape their dominion, parceling out thunder and sea, underworld and sky. He saw how they withheld knowledge as power, how they hardened the flame of the heavens as both weapon and crown. And in this withholding, Prometheus saw a repeat of the same cycle that had driven Cronus to devour his children, Uranus to bind Gaia, and the Titans to fall to the new gods. Fear wrapped his rule. The world was changing again, but change meant nothing if it did not reach the roots. So Prometheus bent to humankind like a farmer stooping to cold soil. He gave them small things at first, hints of how to shape flint, how to use stone against the bone. He showed them where clay could be hardened, how branches could weave into shelter, small secrets, stolen not with fanfare, but with the quiet nod of a Titan who understood that sometimes rebellion begins not with war, but with warmth. His gifts did not go unnoticed. Zeus, seated on Olympus's peak, thundered at the first flickers of firelight rising from crude hearths. He saw sparks glimmer where there should have been darkness, and ordered Prometheus to answer for this presumption. Prometheus answered, as he always did, with questions that slipped through the fingers of gods as easily as mist. Why should mortals shiver while Olympus feasts? Why should the flame that tempers metal and flesh alike belong only to those who have never known cold? Zeus did not bother to argue. He forbade fire outright. The divine flame was to remain locked in the heavens, tended by the Olympians alone. Let humankind stumble in the dark, it would remind them of their place. But Prometheus, watching the humans gather in their cold circles, knew the place of these fragile creatures was not the dust but the dawn. And so, like a thief who believes the heist worth the chains to come, he planned his greatest theft yet. Some say he plucked fire from Helios's chariot as it dragged the sun across the sky. Others say he reached into the forge of Hephaestus, the divine smith, and caught a single coal in a hollow fennel stalk. However it happened, all the stories agree on what came next. Prometheus returned to humankind, not with thunder or crowns, but with a single, flickering flame, a secret sun, small enough to cradle, but bright enough to push back the cold that had ruled their nights. When the first humans saw this spark, they did not know what it was. They touched it and yelped at the burn, drew back and tried again. Prometheus watched them learn pain and wonder in the same heartbeat. And when they learned that fire could warm, cook, forge, and guard, he saw in their eyes the first true glint of what they might one day become. But theft, in a world ruled by kings who feared being overthrown, is never forgiven. Prometheus knew the cost would come. He did not run. He did not plead. He sat among the humans and watched them build their first hearths, forge their first tools, and cast their first shadows against cave walls. And somewhere on Olympus, Zeus's rage gathered like thunderclouds over a spring field, not because of the flame alone, but because a Titan that dared remind the gods that knowledge, once stolen, cannot be caged. So Prometheus, the foresighted one, the quiet spark in the cold dark, waited for the chains he knew would find him. He looked at the humans and whispered only this: tend the fire well, someday it will outshine Olympus itself. When Prometheus carried fire down to humankind, he did more than warm cold flesh and brighten caves. He cracked Olympus's fragile hold over the mortal world. In that flicker of flame, Zeus saw not just disobedience, but defiance, the same defiance that once cut Uranus from the sky and toppled Cronus from his unseen throne. Zeus, king of thunder, lord of storms, sat upon his new seat high above the world's peaks and felt that old tremor only rulers know, the hush of fear that one spark might become a wildfire they could never stamp out. To Zeus, the gift of fire was not warmth, but rebellion kindled in clay bodies, soft hands turned cunning dot. So the king of the gods resolved to answer Prometheus's theft with a lesson that would echo through time, a punishment so cruel, so enduring, that all who saw it would know what happened to those who dared to steal what belonged to the gods. Prometheus knew this, too. He felt the storm gathering around him as clearly as he felt the warmth of his stolen flame. He could have fled. The Titan's blood in him was vast and enduring, his cunning sharper than any iron chain. But Prometheus did not run. He stood beside humankind, watching them coax the first sparks into embers, embers into hearts, hearts into roaring pyres that could smelt copper and bend bone. He watched them test the edges of this new power, learning that fire not only warms, but devours, not only cooks but scars. And in their burns and blisters, Prometheus saw exactly what he had hoped for: growth. Not easy or gentle, but real. When Zeus's thunder finally broke over him, Prometheus greeted it not as a victim, but as a stubborn gardener greeting the frost he knew would come. He let the god's servant seize him, the unbreakable chains of Hephaestus clinking cold against Titan's skin. He did not plead for mercy. He spoke only once, and not to Zeus, but to Hephaestus. This fire will burn long, for Olympus is cold. Stone, remember that when you strike the hammer, Hephaestus, the reluctant blacksmith of the gods, forged the chains all the same. He, too, owed Zeus his place. And what is loyalty to one's craft if not a chain of its own? With every strike of hammer on anvil, he shaped Prometheus's doom, manacles that could hold a Titan's endless strength, links that would never rust nor break until the king of gods chose so. When the chains were done, Zeus sent Prometheus to the edges of the world, the lonely crags of the Caucasus Mountains, a spine of cold stone, so high even storms stumbled there. There, on a lonely rock face, Prometheus was shackled, wrists bound to the sheer cliff, ankles pinned against granite older than the myths themselves. There was no throne, no cell, no guard, but the endless wind. Zeus wanted him on display, a monument to the limits of rebellion, a warning visible to gods, titans, and mortals alike. This is what happens when you feed sparks to clay. But the chains were only half the punishment. Zeus wanted the sentence to live, to breathe pain, fresh each day so no one would ever forget. So he called for an eagle, not an ordinary bird, but a monstrous thing, feathers sharper than bronze, talons that could crack bones like dry twigs. Every day the eagle came, drawn by divine will to Prometheus's naked side. It tore into his flesh with beak and claw, ripping out his liver, slow, methodical, unhurried. For mortals, such agony would have lasted mere moments. For a Titan, the torment renewed itself endlessly. Each night, as the sun slipped behind the cold peaks, Prometheus's wounds sealed shut, his immortal flesh wove itself whole once more, and every dawn the eagle returned, hungry and unrelenting. When storms howled across the Caucasus, the eagle perched on Prometheus's ribs, wings spread wide, savoring the warm meal. Beneath the eternal frost, when the sun blazed, the bird's shadow danced along the cliff face like a dark banner declaring Zeus's rule. Prometheus did not scream every time, not always. Some days he endured in silence, counting each heartbeat, as proof that the pain had not stripped him of foresight. Some days he cursed Zeus in languages older than Olympian speech. Some days he spoke softly to the wind, whispering secrets no ear but the mountains heard, the shape of things to come, the fall hidden inside every throne, the seed of rebellion buried in every act of tyranny. Below him, Far from the wind-swept cliffs, humankind tended their small fires. They learned how to shape metal from ores, how to forge plows and blades. They carved wheels, marked the seasons, and told stories that remembered Prometheus not just as a titan, but as the quiet reason warmth still wrapped their children. Through the coldest nights, word of Prometheus's agony spread, even among the Olympians. Some laughed. Ares, drunk on bloodlust and battle, called it just punishment for a thief. Apollo, patron of light, found the irony bitter, but just. The thief of flame devoured by an eagle beneath the same sun that lights Olympus. Hera, Zeus's watchful queen, spoke nothing but watched closely, wondering if perhaps even kings could trap themselves in their own punishments. Only Hermes, the messenger and trickster, dared visit Prometheus when the winds calmed. Some say Hermes came not out of pity, but out of curiosity, to listen, to trade words with a titan who seemed unbreakable despite chains and claw. Why endure this? Hermes once asked him, perched on the rock face like a shadow of the eagle. You could have begged, bargained, bent your neck to Zeus and ended it all. Prometheus, pale and trembling from the eagle's last visit, smiled. When clay shapes itself in the dark, it must know what burns. They know now. That is enough. Hermes, ever curious, tilted his head. Even gods forget. Men forget faster. You could be forgotten. Prometheus closed his eyes. Then the flame will remind them. And so it went, year after year, century after century. The endless torment, the birds' daily feast, the nightly healing. Mortals below grew into new shapes, farmers, herders, builders of cities that flickered like stars against the belly of the night. And each hearth they kindled, each spark they carried from one dying flame to another, was Prometheus's hidden rebellion living on. Zeus watched from Olympus, thunder resting like a crown in his clenched hand. He ruled storms and seas, sky and earth. Yet every time a mortal struck flint and coaxed a spark into flame, the king of the gods felt that same old shiver, the sickle's echo, the whisper that no power stands forever. Prometheus hung on his rock, ribs bare to wind and eagles, talons, and dreamed of the day the chains would break. He did not know when or how, only that the cycle always turns. For even foresight has limits, but hope, like fire, feeds itself on whatever small twigs it can find. Prometheus's punishment endured 4 ages, measured not by mortal years, but by the slow creep of mountains shifting, forests rising and falling, rivers carving new paths through stone. Yet through it all, the chained titan remained, a ragged figure fixed to cold rock, his ribs a ladder for an eagle's talons. His eyes never shut for long. Below, humankind kindled their fires, fed them with dry branches, and passed the flame from village to village, generation to generation. In every hearth and forge, Prometheus's rebellion smoldered on, a secret reminder that even the gods could not unmake what had once been freely given. Olympus watched. Zeus watched, though he ruled storms and sky. Each flicker of firelight, beneath the dark canopy of earth, reminded him that rule was never perfect. No chain was so strong that it could bind thought itself, and Prometheus, abound yet unbowed, remained the stubborn stone in the king's shoe, a lesson in defiance that could not be struck down by thunder alone. Yet nothing in myth stays forever frozen. The tale of Prometheus did not end in endless torment, because myth, like fire, feeds on change. The first cracks came not from the mountain, but from Zeus's own designs. In his hunger to teach humankind a final lesson, Zeus crafted a new punishment, not for Prometheus directly, but for the clay creatures the Titan had dared to cherish. From Hephaestus's forge and Athena's clever hands came Pandora, a woman sculpted with divine precision, given gifts from every god: beauty, grace, cunning, curiosity. Pandora carried with her a jar, later called a box, by those who retold the tale again and again. Within it swirled every sorrow, every ache, every whispered misfortune that might make humankind remember their place beneath Olympus. When Pandora, by design or by innocent wonder, opened the jar, she unleashed pain into the world, sickness, envy, toil, death. But among these dark wines fluttered one thing that refused to flee entirely: hope. Some say Prometheus, even chained, had a hand in that, a last, small flicker left for mortals to cling to when all else turned bitter. But Pandora's jar did not lessen Prometheus's torment. If anything, Zeus tightened the chains, made the eagle sharper, the wines colder. Yet myth demands balance, and even a king as proudful as Zeus knew that endless punishment risks breeding not fear, but sympathy, and sympathy breeds rebellion. So Zeus turned his eye to another, Heracles, son of Zeus, but of mortal flesh, a hero whose labors rattled the world like dice in a god's hand. Heracles, Hercules to later tongues, was strength given shape, the bridge between men and gods. As he roamed the edges of the world completing his labors, he came at last to the cold shoulders of the Caucasus. There, amid the shrieking winds, Heracles found Prometheus. He found the ragged Titan lashed to stone, his blood frozen to the granite, the eagle perched nearby, its feathers slick with gore. Heracles, who had wrestled lions, cleaned stables fit for monsters, and carried the weight of the heavens for Atlas himself, saw in Prometheus not just suffering but defiance that deserved reward. With his bow strung taut, Heracles loosed a single arrow, the shaft humming through mountain air. It struck the eagle square in its beating heart. The creature fell in a tangle of feathers and iron beak, never to rise again. One chain gone, the chain of daily agony, the beak that tore living flesh. Then Heracles turned to the bonds. He lifted his club. No magic hammer, no divine thunderbolt, just the blunt force of mortal will give an heroic shape. He shattered the manacles from Prometheus's wrists, snapped the shackles from his ankles. The chains fell away, clattering down the cliff face like discarded lies. Yet freedom is never free, even for titans. A condition clung to Prometheus like a final hook in flesh, for the old order to hold, for Zeus's word to remain unbroken. Someone must bear a chain. The myths differ on whether Prometheus agreed freely or whether Zeus decreed it. Some say the Titan was made to wear a ring, forged from a link of his ancient chains, set with a splinter of the mountain's stone, a token of his old bondage, so he would never stand wholly unbound. Prometheus accepted it. After all, foresight had taught him that all freedom bears a scar, all gifts a price. The ring was no prison. It was a reminder. The fire he had stolen was worth the chain that followed. And so Prometheus stepped down from his cold perch. He stood once more on Earth's living skin, the wines no longer his jailers, but his companions. He did not reclaim Olympus or seek revenge on Zeus. Instead, he turned his gaze back to humankind, to their flickering hearts, their clumsy hands now shaping plows and spears, their fires pushing back shadows that once belonged to monsters and gods alike. He wandered among them, a silent guide. In some villages, he taught them how to read the seasons in the stars. In others, he showed them how to temper iron, how to raise stones into walls that could outlast storms. Always, though, he watched their fires, the small blazes that carried his legacy, the promise that light, once given, can never truly be reclaimed. Zeus, from his storm-wreathed throne, did not strike him down again. Perhaps the king of gods understood at last that fear cannot bind what curiosity has set free. Or perhaps he simply found new mischiefs to tame, new rebellions to quell, new storms to hurl at mortals who dared reach to hide. In time, people forgot the cliff in the Caucasus. The eagle became a symbol carved into marble or inked onto parchment. The chain melted into stories told by flickering firelight, a warning, a promise, a reminder that fire's warmth is never just warmth, but a spark of rebellion carried in every hand that tends a flame. And Prometheus, ever watchful, ever stubborn, remains in every tale, where the weak find warmth, where a single spark defies a long night. His liver no longer grows back for an eagle's feast, but his lesson does. That knowledge cannot be caged, that warmth belongs to those who shiver, and that even the smallest flame can outlast a god's thunder dot. So the next time you strike a match, coax an ember into life, or watch a flame flicker in a darkened room, think of the chained titan who chose to suffer, so that humankind might remember. In the coldest places, even stolen fire can light the world. Atlas shrugs. The titan who held the skyfall, he became a living pillar. Before his shoulders turned, stone into scaffold for the heavens. Atlas was not yet a cautionary statue or a frozen figure on old maps. He was simply a titan, vast and enduring, whose greatest flaw was loyalty to the losing side. In the first age, when Cronus ruled with his brothers from Mount Arthrids, Atlas stood among the strongest of their kin. He was the son of Iapetus, the same titan who fathered Prometheus, Epimetheus, and Menetius. But unlike cunning Prometheus or foolish Epimetheus, Atlas had no gift for subtlety or trickery. His gift was endurance, the sheer, unyielding force of holding firm when all else buckled. When Zeus gathered his siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and rose from hidden caves to cast down Cronus, Atlas did not flinch. He took his place at the front of the Titan ranks, clad in bronze and wrapped in the old pride of the firstborn powers. To Atlas, loyalty was not a strategy. It was a bedrock. The sky itself could fall, but he would not bend. And so the Titanomachi came. That great echo of betrayal and thunder, the second rebellion that split the world as the sickle once split the sky from the earth. For 10 long years, Atlas carried boulders upon his shoulders and flung them down Mount Olympus, his roars shaking valleys into new rivers. He led the charge when titans surged like earthquakes across plains. He held the line when Zeus's storms raked them back into submission. The Cyclopes hurled thunderbolts down from secret caves. The Hecatonchires, unchained now, flung entire mountains like pebbles. But Atlas did not hide in shadows or caves. He stood in the open, a living bulwark of the old order, raw, stubborn, unwilling to believe that even the strongest walls can crack when time insists on passing through. Sometimes, when the battles paused, Atlas would stand on a shattered ridge, breathing in the sulfur stench of scorched earth. He would look skyward, not in prayer, for titans do not pray, but in stubborn wonder that the stars above him could remain unchanged, while below, brother ripped brother apart for the right to rule the same dust among his own. Atlas was respected, but not loved. He had no sly words like Prometheus, no reckless fire like Menetius. His siblings called him the Enduring One, the Pillar, the mountain that walks. They knew if any titan could stand until the final thunderbolt fell, it would be Atlas. But strength alone could not win what cunning and chaos had undone. As years passed, the titans grew wearier. Some deserted to the shadows, some turned secret alliances. Some, like Prometheus, betrayed the cause outright, whispering advice to Zeus and forging secret paths to victory. Atlas knew betrayal by then. He could feel it in the hush that fell across Titan camps at night. The way old friends avoided his steady gaze. The way Cronus brooded on his cold throne with the same fear that had driven him to swallow his own children. Atlas despised that fear. He despised the creeping truth that even titans, built to endure, could be eroded by dread. When the final battle raged across the Salis plains, Atlas led the last charge. He hurled stones that flattened mountainsides. He fought shoulder to shoulder with Menetius, whose reckless pride burned as bright as Atlas's iron loyalty. They roared defiance against Zeus's thunder, against Poseidon's surging tides, against Hades' shadows that swallowed Titan ranks whole. But the Olympians did not fight as the Titans did. They were not raw boulders, they were cunning storms. Zeus struck with lightning that shattered spears mid-flight. Poseidon split the earth beneath Titan feet, swallowing phalanxes whole. Hades spread fear like a creeping mist, whispering betrayal into Titan ears until the lines broke from within. When the dust settled, the Titans were broken. Cronus, the king who once struck sky from earth, knelt in chains forged by his own fear. Menetius fell, reckless pride smothered by Zeus's thunderbolt, hurled into Tartarus to stew with other unrepentant titans. But Atlas did not fall in battle. He did not flee to shadows or chains. He stood alone on the plain, battered but unbent, waiting for the new gods to finish what they had begun. When Zeus approached him, flanked by siblings crowned with the promise of a new order, Atlas lifted his chin and stared into the king's thunder-shadowed eyes. "Strike me down, Olympian," Atlas said, "but do not think the sky will rest easy on your shoulders." Zeus, already too wise for his age, did not strike him down. He knew that killing Atlas would make a martyr of the old power, a rallying cry for titans still hidden in stone cracks and mountain caves. So instead, Zeus chose a punishment that would do what no thunderbolt could: turn Atlas's entrance against him, make his strength into his prison. "You love to stand unyielding," Zeus said, voice calm as the wind before a storm. "Then stand forever." And so Zeus sentenced Atlas to bear the sky. Not the world, as poets sometimes miswrote, but the sky itself, the vast, crushing dome that Uranus once pressed tight against Gaia, now resting on a single pair of titan shoulders. Some say Atlas begged, some say he laughed, most say he simply shrugged, as if testing the weight of eternity. Then he knelt, braced his broad back, and lifted the sky so that earth and heaven would never again crush one another in chaos. From that day, Atlas became more than a titan. He became a living axis, his knees dug into mountain stone, his shoulders pressed into clouds. He felt storms crawl down his spine, stars shift like sand across his shoulders. Each sunrise slid across his bent neck like a blade. Each sunset dripped like slow honey down his arms. The world spun beneath him, unaware that the sky's calm dome read on an unbroken vow. Endure. So when you look at ancient maps and see Atlas sketched there, kneeling beneath the curve of the heavens, muscles taut beneath mountains of ink, remember that he was once more than a statue or a name for distant peaks. He was the titan who stood when others fell, who carried the sky because he could do nothing less. And in that burden, there is a question that echoes even now. Does strength become prison when the weight you hold is the only thing that keeps you standing? Atlas stood beneath the sky so long that seasons blurred into the weight on his shoulders. Generations rose and fell beneath his bent form, breaking on a rock that neither shifts nor shatters. Civilizations sprouted from the same soil his knees pressed into. Kingdoms built on myths of an unseen giant who held back the crushing dome of chaos. Yet Atlas did not stand forgotten. Travelers whispered of him, the living mountain at the world's edge, so far west that the sun itself brushed his shoulders each night before slipping into ocean's mouth. They called the place the Pillars of Atlas, the ends of the earth where mortals dared not venture for fear they'd slip off the world's rim and into the realm of shadows. Those who found him did not do so by chance. They came when they needed something too heavy for mortal backs, a burden no man could bear alone. Some came to beg wisdom, believing a titan who touched the stars might know their secrets. Others came for power, hoping the sweat of his labor might drip gold into their hands. But Atlas offered nothing freely. What he carried was not a gift but a sentence, and any who approached too close to his shoulders found their petitions crushed beneath the cold press of heaven. Most turned back, frightened by the sight of this vast, kneeling figure whose back merged with clouds, whose arms trembled not from weakness, but from the unending promise to never let go. Then came Heracles, the son of Zeus by mortal flesh, the hero whose 12 labors sent him to the world's raw edges and beyond. By the time Heracles sought Atlas, he had already wrestled lions, slain hydras, and plucked golden apples from guarded groves. His fame thundered across lands, like distant storms. Yet even his strength bent beneath the tasks laid upon him by kings, who feared his power. One such task led him to Atlas, the 11th labor, to steal the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, these sacred fruits, shining with the promise of immortality, grew in an orchard tended by Atlas's own daughters. The garden lay at the world's farthest reach, its boughs twisting beneath the sunset's dying glow, guarded by the Hesperides, and a serpent coiled endlessly around its roots. When Heracles reached Atlas, he did not come with spear raised or bow drawn. Instead, he stood beneath the shadow of that living pillar, squinting up at the Titan's face hidden in the swirl of clouds and dusk. The wind hissed around him, carrying the taste of salt and sky. "Atlas," Heracles called. His voice cracked the hush like a thrown stone shatters calm water. "Lend me your help, and I will ease your burden." It was not the first time someone had offered, but this time Atlas looked down, truly looked. He saw the hero who carried the scent of storms and lion's blood, who bore Zeus's spark in mortal veins yet lived closer to earth than Olympus. He saw not just brawn, but cunning in the way Heracles' eyes never left the trembling line where heaven met Titan flesh. "What would you ask of me?" Atlas rumbled, his voice low thunder rolling down the mountain slopes. "Fetch me the apples." Heracles said, "Your daughters tend them, the serpent coils at your feet. Who else but you can pluck them without waking the gods' wrath?" Atlas almost laughed, the sound like boulders grinding. No one had asked him for aid in centuries. Mortals came to gawk prey, never to bargain. He felt the sky's weight shift as he imagined setting it aside. If only for a heartbeat. He wondered if he still remembered the feel of standing upright, free from the crushing dome pressed onto bone and sinew. "And you would hold this for me?" Atlas asked. He shifted one massive shoulder. Clouds wept rain down his back, like sweat from a stone. Heracles nodded, his mortal neck strained upward, measuring the arc of the burden he could not truly see. He did not flinch, he did not boast. He simply braced his feet on the cold rock and opened his arms wide. "I am my father's son," Heracles said. "I will hold what he cast upon you. But bring me the apples." A silence stretched then, long enough for the wind to roar through Atlas's matted hair, for the setting sun to kiss the ocean's lip. Then, slow as mountains shift, Atlas bent his knees and shifted the vault of heaven downward. Clouds swirled around Heracles' shoulders like foaming breakers. The sky pressed cold and vast against mortal flesh. For an instant, an eye blink in eternity, Atlas stood upright. He stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders. He felt the aching muscles that had not moved freely since the old war ended in dust and thunder. Then, without a backward glance, he stepped west, through the orchard's secret boughs, past his daughters' worry stares, past the serpent's coiling question of scale and fang. Atlas plucked the apples as easily as if he were gathering stones from a riverbed. He could do this because the garden was bound to him, fruit of his bloodline, roots sunk deep in his exile's soil. He held the golden orbs in one vast palm, their skin glimmering with promise no mortal could claim for long. When he returned, he found Heracles beneath the dome of sky, knees bent, shoulders quaking. Sweat streamed down the hero's neck, soaking lion skin and tunic alike. The sky pressed on him, and as punishment, but as proof that even Zeus's strongest son could only bear so much. Atlas looked at the burden he'd carried for ages and felt something stir. Not pity, exactly, but recognition. He saw in Heracles the same unyielding lion that had once driven him to hurl mountains at Olympus, to stand fast when other titans fled. Yet beneath that strength flickered the mortal's cunning spark, the ember Prometheus had stolen and hidden in humankind's breast. "You struggle," Atlas said, his voice almost gentle. "It is heavy." Heracles grunted through gritted teeth. "But I bear it, as you do." Atlas tilted his head, the apples gleaming in his grasp. An idea flickered, sly as a fox's grin in stone eyes. Why not keep this freedom? Atlas thought. Why not give the sky to this mortal hero, whose father had cast him down in the first place? Let Zeus's son shoulder what Zeus himself decreed. "I will take the apples to Eurystheus myself," Atlas said slowly. "I will deliver them, you stay here." bear this dome a while longer. But Heracles, whose strength was famed yet whose cunning was often forgotten, smiled through the strain. A fair trade, he rasped, only my shoulders slip. Hold it for me a moment, while I adjust my cloak. Then go, Titan, and be free as storms. Atlas, whose mind bore the weight of ages, but whose pride had not dulled to mortal tricks, nodded. He stepped close, lifting the sky once more from Heracles' bowed shoulders. The hero stepped aside, rolling his arms, feigning the soreness that was all too real. Then Heracles seized the apples and laughed, loud enough to echo from mountain to sea. He backed away from Atlas's reach, golden orbs clutched in his broad hands. A fair trade indeed, enduring one. My labor is done, your burden remains, Atlas roared. He lunged forward, but stopped short, for the sky dipped the moment his arms loosened. He felt it sag, a weight not even a Titan could dodge, once it settled again upon flesh and stone. Heracles bowed low, not mockery but respect, for he had matched endurance with cunning and proved both equally sharp. Then he turned east, the golden apples safe at his side, the promise of his labor fulfilled. Atlas knelt again, arms outstretched, shoulders locked beneath the dome. The sky pressed back into place, and the world found balance once more on the unbroken back of a Titan too stubborn to crumble. Yet some say that when the winds swell high above the pillars of Atlas, when clouds shudder in the dusk, the Titan still shrugs, testing the weight, wondering if one day a crack might split the dome so wide that even he could stand again, unburdened beneath the naked stars. When Heracles vanished beyond the horizon, clutching the golden apples that would seal yet another triumph in his string of labors, Atlas stood once more where he had always been, shoulders bent beneath the trembling sky, feet braced against the shifting crust of the world's edge. The brief taste of freedom curdled on his tongue, but he swallowed it like bitter wine, for even disappointment, when endured long enough, becomes a familiar companion. And so the world spun on. Seasons changed in the lands beneath Atlas's knees. Green springs gave way to gold and dust, ice to floods, generations to generations. Tribes that once hid in caves beneath the fear of the Titans now spread outward like veins of bronze and iron. They raised cities of marble, ships of cedar and linen sail. They mapped coastlines, counting each distant horizon as if each would lead them to the edge of Atlas's lonely post. From the slopes of his mountain perch, Atlas watched them come and go, traders with salt crusting their beards, philosophers arguing about what lay beyond the last sunset, conquerors who dreamed that if they sailed far enough west, they might find the Titan himself and strike a bargain for a strength everlasting. They found only ocean, gulls, and stories told by fishermen whose nets sometimes pulled up strange golden scales that glowed faintly in the dusk. Now and then, whispers would rise that Atlas had finally dropped his burden, that the dome of sky had split open and the stars had fallen like ash on the world below. Yet always the stars returned each night in the same constellations, familiar patterns that shepherds and sailors clung to for guidance when the sea's dark mouth threatened to swallow them whole. Perhaps it was fitting that the sky Atlas bore became a map itself, the constellations a record of his unspoken entrance. When mortals lifted their eyes and traced Orion's belt or the arc of the Pleiades, they unknowingly read the stories pressed into Atlas's back. He had become their axis, the unchanging point around which they turned, measured seasons, counted harvests, marked the passage from birth to death. His daughters, the Hesperides, tended their orchard of golden fruit beyond mortal reach, their laughter like wind chimes in a dusk garden. Some say they wept for him, slipping between twilight and dawn to brush the sweat from his brow, to whisper songs that only he could hear through the endless hush of the stars. Yet Atlas did not weep for himself. A Titan's tears turn mountains to salt, rivers to brine. Better to bear the sky dry-eyed than drown the earth beneath him for a flood of regret. He did not pity himself. To endure was his nature, as cunning was Prometheus's, as force was Cronus's. To hold was to be Atlas. Without the sky, what shape would he be? Still, the world beneath his bent form changed in ways even a titan could not stop. New gods rose from the east, worshipped in desert temples and marble basilicas, carrying with them rumors that the old myths were just stories, bedtime tales for simple minds who feared thunder and flame. Philosophers began to speak of spheres and orbits, laws invisible yet precise enough to chart the moon's cold dance or measure the Earth's hidden axis. They named mountains after him, vast peaks in North Africa where Atlas's knees were said to press into the Earth's crust. They mapped oceans beyond those mountains and called them Atlantean seas, the edge of the known, the threshold of dreams. They even told tales of an entire vanished island, Atlantis, that bore his name, imagining it as a lost echo of Titan grandeur drowned beneath waves too deep for mortal memory. Yet none of this reached Atlas himself. He remained as he was, a figure, both real and imagined, half myth and half monument. Some passing shepherds claimed that when storms howled and lightning flared across lonely peaks, they glimpsed him in the clouds, a massive shape shifting shoulders beneath thunderheads, a living pillar that shrugged the weight of the world, just enough to send down rain. Others swore that when they stood alone beneath clear night skies, they could hear a low groan in the wind, the Titan exhaling through pines and crags, reminding them that no matter how vast the heavens seemed, they still rested on something older, stronger, and infinitely more patient than any king or priest. Now and then, Zeus's other children, heroes and demigods, monsters and muses, would pass near Atlas's reach, their own quests for immortality or vengeance. They carried fragments of his story, whether they knew it or not, in the way they faced impossible burdens. They knew that true strength is not always found in the roar of battle, but in the quiet promise to hold what must be held, no matter how long. When mortals built libraries, they called them atlases too, great bound volumes that held entire worlds pressed between leather and ink. Map makers traced coastlines with trembling hands, charting oceans that curved away into the dusk. They named them after Atlas, as if each parchment page could bear a piece of his weight, the burden of knowing where one stood in a world too vast to carry alone. And so Atlas lives on, not only as a figure chained to myth, but as the unspoken truth behind every unseen burden. He is the patron of those who bear what others cannot see, the mother who carries her family through lean harvests, the builder who braces beams against storms, the watchman who holds a lantern through the long night, so others may sleep unafraid. If you stand beneath a clear sky and trace the constellations, know that you to balance yourself upon his patient shoulders. For all the clever words of philosophers, the domes of observatories, the equations that measure the stars, all of it rests on the simple truth that something, someone, must endure the weight. And Atlas does. He always has. He always will, unless one dusk yet to come. He finally shrugs and lets the sky fall, reminding all beneath it that strength is not the same as servitude, and that even the most patient pillars crack when the world forgets what holds it up. So when next you glance at a map or whisper a prayer beneath a star-crowded sky, think of the Titan who kneels unseen at the edge of all things, the enduring one who carries more than any crown could ever promise, the quiet truth that the heaviest burdens are the ones that keep everything else from crashing down. Cronus' sickle, the Titan who devoured time long before Atlas bent beneath the sky, before Prometheus hid fire inside clay hands, before the Olympians perched on thrones of cloud and lightning. There was Cronus, last born yet first crowned among the Titans. His was an age before time had a name, before calendars marked the slow decay of days into years. If Uranus was the sky and Gaia the earth, then Cronus was the blade that split them apart, the wedge that cracked eternity open, so that time could begin to flow. Cronus was not born with a sickle in his hand. He came into being cradled by Earth's soft belly, and the unyielding weight of the sky pressed tight against it. His mother, Gaia, swelled with life, seeds and stones, rivers and mountains, and the children who would one day carve myths into flesh and stone alike. Uranus, the sky, was her mate and her jailer. In those days, he stretched himself over Gaia so tightly that nothing new could breathe between them. The world beneath the sky was restless, a womb that never delivered, a garden that could not grow. The first children of this union, the hundred-handed ones, the Cyclopes, lay buried in the earth's secret chambers, pressed into darkness by their father's jealous dread. Uranus feared what his children might become, if they were ever allowed to stand upright beneath him. But Gaia, older than even the Titans would later remember, whispered to the stones in her belly and the roots in her soil. She dreamed of space, of air that could move between sky and earth, of seasons that could shift, of seeds that could crack their shells and push green shoots toward sunlight. To do this, she needed a blade sharp enough to cut eternity open. So she fashioned a sickle, not of iron, for iron had yet to be born, but of cold flint and star's edge, sharper than mountain wines, crueler than any thorn. She called to her sons, the Titans who stirred restlessly in her cavernous dark. She asked who among them would lift the blade and free the world from their father's crushing embrace. One by one, they trembled at her whisper. Oceanus, the endless river Titan, slipped away, content to flow where he could find space between stones. Hyperion, the light-bearer, turned his gaze upward, but found no courage to meet the sky's fury. Zeus, Crius, Iapetus, almighty in name, small when faced with the thought of severing father from mother, sky from earth, only Cronus stepped forward. Youngest yet keenest, he was no pillar like Atlas, no cunning flicker like Prometheus. He was patient dread, a harvest waiting to ripen. He took the sickle from Gaia's hand and tested its edge on the skin of his own palm. He did not flinch when it drew Titan blood, for blood meant the blade was true. By night, when Uranus lay across Gaia, like a vault of stars, pressing the mountains flat, Cronus crept from the earth's hidden chambers. He rose from the soil like a sapling splitting rock. His brothers waited, breath caught in ancient lungs, their courage tangled in roots too deep to pull free. Cronus did not ask them to stand with him. In the hush before the sky's breath shifted, he lifted the sickle high, and with one clean stroke, hewed Uranus from Gaia's breast. The blade hissed through flesh and sky alike, cutting not just body, but the bond that sealed Earth's belly shut. From Uranus's wound sprang blood that fell like meteors into the sea, foaming into new shapes, furies and giants, Aphrodite herself rising later from the foam's echo. The sky recoiled, not dead, but forever parted from Earth's skin. Air poured in, rivers found their courses. Mountains heaved upward to scrape the clouds. Seeds cracked open in the first true spring the world would ever know. Cronus, holding the dripping sickle, stood atop this newborn freedom. His brothers crowned him with fear and awe, king of the Titans, ruler of an age that would remember him not for the harvest he promised but for the hunger that followed. For Gaia, the world mother, this was enough for a time. Her belly eased, her hidden children freed from the iron embrace of the sky. But what Cronus gained in rule, he lost in peace. Uranus's dying curse clung to him like brambles. As you have done to me, so shall your own son do to you. King forged by betrayal, hears betrayal in every heartbeat. So Cronus, crowned by blood and blade, took sister Rhea as his queen. They birthed children who flickered with the first sparks of Olympian flame: Hestia, Hera, Demeter, Hades, Poseidon, and last of all Zeus. Each birth was a reminder that the curse whispered in his father's blood might one day crack his throne. As surely as he cracked the sky dot, so Cronus turned the sickle's edge inward. He devoured his children one by one, not out of hunger but fear. He swallowed their cries and their promise of rebellion, hoping to keep eternity sealed inside his belly the way Uranus once sealed it beneath his starry skin. Rhea wept as each child vanished behind her husband's teeth. She wept for a world that now breathed freely, yet might choke on the silence of children never grown. She wept for the sickle, hidden now yet humming in Cronus's mind every time he closed his eyes and saw sky cut from earth. In the end, the sickle's promise could not be digested, for the world moves forward when it is cut open. And in the hush between swallowed child and next birth, Rhea found her cunning. She wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and gave it to Cronus, who, half mad with dread, gulped it down without question. The true child, Zeus, she hid in a cave on Crete, beneath the bleating cover of goats and the clash of armored dancers, who stamped their feet to drown his infant cries. There the last-born Olympian learned the hush of stone and soil, the patient edge of rebellion buried like a seed waiting for spring. And so Cronus ruled, the sickle's promise humming in the shadows, the sky above him forever parted, yet never fully conquered. In his belly, the children waited, not dead, not lost, but seeds pushing against the tight skin of a king who thought he could devour time itself. The sickle, meanwhile, rested in the deep places of the earth, its blade still keen, its promise still humming, for no king, titan or god, can hold back the harvest forever. And in that hush of waiting, a single question took root. What happens to he who devours time when time comes calling for its due? In the dim hush of Cronus's reign, the world seemed at peace, at least to those who looked no deeper than the mountain's steady shoulders or the rivers that kept to their winding beds. The sky remained parted from the earth, and seeds pushed their green fingers into sunlight without fear of the sky pressing them flat again. Yet beneath this calm, a deeper tension coiled, like the sickle Gaia once pressed into her youngest son's hand. It waited for the next swing. Cronus sat enthroned on Mount Arthritis, that ancient fortress of the Titans. His siblings ringed him in stone halls, cold with mountain wines and flickering oil lamps. They called him king and held their silence when he passed, the iron weight of his presence as heavy as the sky he had once set free. Yet no crown weighs so heavily as fear. Each night, Cronus dreamed of the sickle, the blade that had split, father from mother, sky from earth. In his sleep, it returned to his hand again and again. Sometimes he swung it at the shadows that gathered behind his throne. Sometimes it turned inward, humming against his own ribs, reminding him that the curse of Uranus had not dulled with years. And so Cronus swallowed his children. One by one they came, bright sparks born from the union of himself and Rhea, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Infants cradled briefly in their mother's trembling arms, before Cronus's shadow fell across the room, a storm cloud. He took them gently at first, whispering that it was for the good of all, that no child of his would wield the sickle against him. Then he opened his jaws wide, and made his stomach an unmarked grave for futures he could not bear to see. Yet, even the deepest belly cannot digest destiny. The children did not vanish, not in truth. Inside him, they drifted like seeds locked in winter's soil, silent, waiting, pressing faintly against the walls of their father's fear. Cronus felt them in quiet moments when the winds fell still, soft flutterings inside his guts that reminded him he was not king of time, only its custodian, until time reclaimed itself. Rhea watched all this with eyes dry as old riverbeds. Her tears, once plentiful, had long since hardened into a quiet resolve. Each child taken by Cronus left her more empty, yet strangely more determined, for she saw what her husband could not. That no cage remains uncracked forever, no hunger so vast it cannot choke on what it devours. When the sixth child grew in her womb, the last spark that would light Olympus like a beacon, she turned not to her husband, but to Gaia, the world mother who remembered betrayal as easily as she remembered birth. In secret, Rhea crept to the deep places where Gaia's roots hummed with ancient knowing. Mother Earth, Rhea whispered, pressing her palms to cold stone, help me save this child. Let Cronus think his fear is fed, while time slips through his jaws unnoticed. Gaia, older than Titans, older than fear, stirred beneath Rhea's touch. She answered not in words, but in tremors that guided the queen's steps to a hidden hollow on Crete, a cave where goats grazed above, where armored dancers would clash their spears and shields to drown the wails of a god yet to grow into thunder. And so when her time came, Rhea gave birth not in Arthur's cold halls, but in that warm dark cradle of stone. She swaddled the infant Zeus, small, helpless yet gleaming with a promise stronger than bronze, and kissed his brow. Then she wrapped a stone in cloth, shaping it with her hands until it felt like a sleeping child. When Cronus demanded the newborn, Rhea offered the bundle without flinch. Her eyes met his as he lifted the weight, and in that stare lay all her secret defiance. Cronus did not see it. He saw only his own survival, another son's cry muffled beneath the grind of his teeth and the darkness of his belly. He swallowed the stone whole, and deep within, the true children stirred. They felt the false weight settle beside them, not warm and growing but cold and hard. The stone did not shift like Hades did, dreaming of shadow realms inside his father's gut. It did not flicker, like Poseidon, who dreamed of deep waters he had never seen. The stone was a promise that what Cronus devoured was not enough to silence what lay hidden. Meanwhile, on Crete's wild slopes, the baby Zeus grew, nurtured by Amalthea, the goat whose milk carried the taste of mountain storms. He learned the hush of stone and the lullaby of armor crashing. The Curetes, those armored dancers, clashed spear against shield to mask his cries, each clang a tiny rebellion against Cronus's dread. Zeus learned early that noise could hide secrets, that cunning could grow as strong as muscle. As he grew, Zeus learned what Cronus refused to believe, that time devours all kings, even those who think themselves its master. Each thundercloud that gathered on Crete's peaks carried whispers of what lay ahead, a rebellion sparked not from the outside, but from within Cronus's own ribs. When Zeus was grown enough to shape storms with a whisper, he sought counsel from Gaia and Metis, the tightness of cunning thought. They brewed him a potion bitter as wormwood, sharp as betrayal. With it, Zeus would force his father to give back what he had stolen, not in pieces, but whole and alive. Zeus returned to Arthur's, not as a child to be devoured, but as a cunning shadow at his father's feast. Disguised, he poured the draught into Cronus's cup, while the king boasted of how he had silenced destiny. He lifted the chalice to cracked lips and drank deeply, never guessing that the rebellion he feared most had already taken root inside him. The potion twisted inside Cronus like a second sickle. It scraped at his ribs, clawed at his gut. The same stomach that once sealed away his children now betrayed him, heaving, trembling, forced to give up what it could not digest. First came Hestia, pale yet warm as a hearth newly kindled. Then Demeter, whose hands dripped with the promise of harvests never reaped. Then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon, each one rising from the pit of Cronus's dread. Not infants, but grown and gleaming with power, they had nursed in the darkness. Cronus, doubled over, grasped his belly as the stone clattered onto the cold floor. It struck the marble with a sound like time's own bell, tolling the end of an age. The king who devoured time had found that time, once swallowed, returned sharper than any sickle. Zeus stood among his freed siblings, the air around him already humming with storms. Together, they turned their gaze on Cronus, father, jailer, king who cut the sky and thought himself above its price. And in the hush, before the first bolt of rebellion struck, Cronus felt the truth he had tried to bury in his stomach, that no hunger can ever silence what the world is destined to become. Yet, the sickle's story was not done, for it lay waiting still, somewhere in earth's deep veins, whispering that all who rise must one day be cut down, just as sky was cut from soil, just as a father was cut from his throne by the same sharp edge he once wielded. And in that promise lay a question sharper than flint. What does it mean to rule if the blade that crowned you never leaves your throat? When Zeus and his freed siblings rose from Cronus's trembling belly, they did not step into a world that welcomed them with open arms. They emerged into an age still thick with the weight of their father's dread. an age where the Titans, ancient and vast, still sat on high thrones of mountain rock, sure that no spark of rebellion could ever shatter the stones they ruled from. But the sickle's promise does not fade when the hand that first swung it loosens its grip. Cronus had cut the sky from earth, true, but he had also cut the certainty of forever. He had opened a crack, and from that crack the future leaked, drop by drop, into the hands of those born to claim it. When Zeus stood beside his sisters and brothers, Hestia's warmth, Hera's iron will, Demeter's blooming harvests, Poseidon's tides, and Hades' deep, quiet shadows, the world felt its axis shift again. The Titans looked down from Mount Arthries and saw not children but rivals, younger, sharper, unbent by the weight of the old world's laws, and so the Titanomachi began, a war echoing the ancient wound that first split sky from soil. 10 long years, the world trembled under that clash, Titans hurling mountains and lightning answering from cloud-shrouded peaks. Oceans rose and fell in Poseidon's wake. The dead whispered secrets to Hades as he marched through shadowed battlefields. Demeter coaxed new growth from scorched plains, while Hera's wrath split enemy ranks with storms of cunning, as sharp as Zeus's bolts. Cronus watched from the heights of Arthries, the sickle never far from his throne. He knew its curve too well to wield it again. Instead, he pressed it into the earth beside him, a reminder that what is cut once can be cut again. Father from child, king from crown, eternity from the shape it tries to hold. When the Cyclopes, freed by Zeus from deep Tartarus, came bearing gifts, thunderbolts, a trident, a helmet of darkness, the balance shifted. These tools were not just weapons, but symbols, proofs that even the world's buried secrets could be bribed into rebellion when the time was ripe. Cronus rallied his kin, Oceanus with rivers raging, Hyperion blazing like the sun, Iapetus wielding raw force beside Menetius' reckless pride. Yet deep cracks spidered through the Titans' ranks. Some, like Prometheus, turned their faces toward the bright promise of Olympus, whispering that the future belongs to the cunning, not the stubborn dot in the end. Cronus' worst fear proved true. Betrayal came not from the edge of a sickle, but from the steady drumbeat of time itself. For every rock hurled by a Titan, Zeus hurled thunder thrice as hard. For every river Oceanus sent flooding into Olympus, Poseidon answered with tides that swallowed plains whole. One by one, the Titans fell back, not dead, for beings older than time do not die as mortals do, but forced to kneel to a new order. Atlas, the unbending pillar, was shackled at the world's edge to hold the sky. Menetius was cast down into Tartarus' choking dark. Iapetus' pride turned to ash alongside Cronus' crown, and Cronus himself. When the final thunderbolt cracked Mount Arthries to its spine, Cronus did not flee. He stood before Zeus, the son he thought devoured, now grown tall and crowned in the storm's fury. They did not trade words of father and son. They spoke instead with force, thunder against time's slow dread. Cronus swung the sickle one last time, but the blade that once cut eternity met Zeus's bolt mid-arc, a flash of light that blinded gods and titans alike. When the brilliance faded, the sickle lay buried in the mountain's roots. Its promise returned to stone. Zeus did not strike Cronus dead. He could not, for what is time without its devourer lurking at the edges, reminding all who rule that harvest must come. Instead, Zeus bound Cronus in chains, forged from the same promise Uranus once spat like blood. He cast him down to Tartarus, that deep pit of echoing hunger where time crawls in circles, but never truly ends. There, Cronus remains, king of a hollow realm, where shadows whisper in circles, where nothing grows, yet nothing truly dies. Some say he rules the ghosts of his own regrets, endlessly counting the seconds he once tried to swallow whole. Others whisper he sleeps, dreaming not of crowns or sickles, but of a moment when sky and earth might press close again and bury his failures under stone and root dot above him. The Olympians built their thrones. Zeus's storms crowned new temples. Hera's crown gleamed beside him. Hestia's hearths glowed warm in every mortal home. Demeter's seeds rose green each spring, Poseidon's tides obeyed the moon's pull, and Hades' shadows gathered all things mortal back to the soil in quiet harvests no king could devour. Yet in every harvest, every ripening fruit, every seed cracked open by frost or flame, the sickle's whisper lingers. For even the gods remember that to rule is to cut, to sever past from future, fear from hope, father from son. The shape of the sickle lives on in the crescent moon, the curve of the reaper's blade, the arc of time itself. So when you see old statues of Cronus, Saturn, as the Romans later named him, crowned with a sickle in one hand and an hourglass in the other, know that you are looking at the Titan who taught the world what it means to measure, to reap, to devour time before it devours you. His gift was terror, but also change, the truth that even the deepest fear can birth new worlds if someone is willing to cut the sky open and let air pour in. And somewhere beneath the earth's crust, the sickle still waits, buried deep, but not dulled, humming with the quiet promise that every golden age carries its own harvest, that every ruler carries within them the seed of their own undoing. In this way, Cronus lives on, not as a king upon a throne, but as the silent whisper that time, once devoured, devours in turn. Thanks for listening to these Greek myths tonight. Which Titan story or forgotten legend did you find most surprising? Share your sleepy thoughts below. I read every comment. Sweet dreams and peaceful nights to you all.